Hello and welcome to the Week 8 Power Hour podcast. I have to apologize. We're recording this one a little late. I had a weird week personally. Johnny knows. Johnny knows all about it. And so we couldn't do it last night. Had to bump it to Saturday morning. Hopefully you still managed to listen. If you did, really appreciate it. Johnny, what's going on?
Oh, nothing, man. Recovering from Halloween weekend already. You?
What did you go as for Halloween?
We had a group go as all the Stranger Things people. So, and no one knew who we were because no one in Hagerstown watches good television. They watch Duck Dynasty.
Why did you just tell everyone where you live? Hagerstown?
Yep.
What if you get a stalker?
That would be fun though, actually.
All right. Well, whatever. More important news. We finally have a Power Hour drinking game. Shout out to our boy Joe Pano at PAENO on Twitter. It's his pin tweet. It's our pin tweet on our Power Hour Twitter account. So if you want to follow along and do this drinking game, check it out. He has it in a Google Doc. I haven't opened it. I don't know what the rules are. I figured that way we could at least do one podcast where you guys get all fucked up. We're not self-aware about it. But the next podcast we'll read it aloud and go over each rule one by one. But this one I wanted to let you guys have a chance to have some fun. I also promised I would talk about the wedding I went to last weekend. Do you want to hear about it, Johnny?
Give it to us, man.
All right. So I woke up late for it, which is fairly typical of me. And I didn't try on my suit and put it on, and it didn't come close to fitting. The pants were I couldn't even zip it up halfway, let alone button it. So I drove to a random tailor. There's some little old Korean lady, and she's helping another family, and they just all stop what they're doing because they see me with my boxers hanging out and not able holding up my pants, and she's like, "Oh, what happened?" And I'm like, I have to go to a wedding in 45 minutes. Can you help me out? I don't want to do it Korean old Korean lady accent in case there's any old Korean ladies watching. But yeah. So she's like go change into something. Do you have anything to change into? And I'm like, let me go back to my car. Let me see. All I had was a bathing suit that didn't really fit, and I accidentally spilled bleach on it, so it's just weirdly discolored. So I put that on. I'm wearing a bathing suit and then a full suit above it, and she's just trashing me the whole time, you look so silly. And then as she's letting the pants out, she's like, oh, what, you ate too much Halloween candy already? And just absolutely trashing me. But she did a good job with it. The kind of fit. She just told me not to eat too much or dance too crazy. And so I went to the wedding. I was 5 minutes late, which wasn't a big deal because it always starts late. And then I got hammered, and I was really worried I made a gigantic fool out of myself. The next morning I had to wake up and do a hungover Fan Vice podcast. And I did it. And I'm also not doing that podcast anymore, maybe because I do it hungover too many times. So I wake up after the podcast. I'm like, okay, first I want to throw up. Second, what did I do last night? Are these people going to talk to me? Was I a gigantic ass? And it turns out I wasn't. I was super charming. I was dancing with the grandmothers. They loved me. I got 3 girls' phone numbers. Drunk Scott killed it. That never happens.
It's your best weekend, man.
Yeah, it was definitely a great weekend for me. We were profitable in DFS, so it was a good weekend for us. What about this weekend, though?
Yeah, man, let's do it. You wanna jump right in?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So first up
is the London game. We have the Skins. I guess they're technically at the Bengals. I don't know. Neither team's really at home because they're in London. This one actually has like a kind of a high over under, like 49.5, and it's gone up since it opened. But I don't really know who I want in this. Like the Skins passing defense is pretty good. Their rushing defense is bad. Jeremy Hill's banged up. The Redskins are using Rob Kelly and Chris Thompson at running back. Jordan Reed looks like he'll be back. Who are you interested in if you're playing a slate with this game?
All right. Well, Josh Norman is questionable, though he flew to London. If he is out, I want so much AJ Green. It's even arguably worth waking up hungover for to check his status.
Right. Yeah. And that's so Bashad Breeland has not been very good this season, but with him and Norman on the field, they've actually, as a duo, been pretty good over the last 4 weeks. I don't think they've allowed a 100-yard passer, but when they saw Beckham, he went for over 100 yards. So I'm not as excited about Andy Dalton this week as I was last week, because you can just you can run on the Skins without any issues at all. So I think the Bengals probably run the ball a ton. That's why I'm not really sure why the over-under is so high. But I think Norman plays. Do you think he's? That's what I would expect.
I think he probably plays. Yeah. He's been practicing. And then you said Jeremy Hill's banged up, but I didn't see him on the injury report this week.
He hasn't been on the injury report over the last few weeks, but he's coming in and out of games. He left the game twice last week. He had a huge game, but he only had 9 carries.
Are you sure that was due to injuries?
Yeah, it was a chest and a shoulder thing. He's been dealing with this same shoulder chest issue for 4 or 5 weeks now, and they're just not saying what it is. So I don't know. The deal is he's going to play. I think if he's healthy, the matchup is great, but it's tough to trust a guy who's only getting 12 carries and may be injured. But he's definitely in play for GPPs because the Skins rushing defense is so bad. But other than that, I'm not even though I'm not really excited about this game. I don't know. Are you?
What about the 2 tight ends? Bengals beat reporter said they think Eifert plays close to his typical workload.
Yeah, I guess you could consider him, since the Bengals have been good, or not the Bengals, the Skins have been good against wide receivers recently. But overall, their passing defense has been good. So I don't know. I'm not excited about the passing games. I should be, I guess. Vegas tells me I should be, but just not all that excited about. And Eifert, he saw 1 target, last 2 targets, had 1 catch. It's I want to see it first with him before I'm going to roll him out. And Jordan Reed. Oh, yeah, Jordan Reed's in play every week when he plays. So.
And what about LaFell if Norman does play?
I don't know.
Gross.
Yeah, it's he keeps scoring touchdowns, but I don't know how long that's going to last. Eventually,
especially with Eifert coming back, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And Rob Kelly.
I
think I like Chris Thompson even more than Rob Kelly, to be honest.
Yeah, I like Chris Thompson for sure, and I think he's going to catch some passes. The Bengals defense has just not been that great as a whole the last couple of weeks. We every week we're the Bengals defense should be better than this, and then they're just not. So they're not that good. They're not good against the rush or the run or the pass. So I think Chris Thompson's definitely interesting. I Rob Kelly's going to get the thing with Rob Kelly is it's if he's struggling, then Chris Thompson's going to play all the snaps. If Rob Kelly's having a good game, Chris Thompson's still going to get the passing work and red zone work. So I like Thompson, though I don't think you can really use either of them for cash games.
All right. You want to talk about a game that's more exciting?
Yeah. So let's talk Seattle, New Orleans. So this game is it's a weird one to diagnose because we know there's going to be points scored, but we also know Seattle's defense is really good, but Drew Brees is at home, so it kind of like cancels out. Brees is interesting. He's thrown for, I think, 3 touchdowns in his last 8 home games. It looks like Michael Thomas probably sees the most of Sherman in this. I doubt Sherman shadows anyone with the way they line up. It's a Jimmy Graham revenge game, Michael Fleener narrative, or Kobe Fleener narrative because he took his job. Kristen Michael should run all over the Saints, and we don't know what's going on with Russell Wilson. Who are you looking at in this one?
Yeah, so I think that was a good point about Breeze at home, kind of canceling out how good Seattle's defense has been. But Seattle's also without Cam Chancellor and Michael Bennett. I think that's big.
Yeah.
So Michael Thomas, I think Sherman sticks to his side, which means he'll mostly get Thomas and Cooks. Cooks has blazing fast speed, and Sherman's not really a guy who runs very fast. That's not really where he excels. Michael Thomas, he was a guy we were torn on in the preseason because we kept hearing, oh, he's going to play the Colston row. He's going to play the Colston role. But he only played in the slot like 5 snaps in his entire college career. And the beat writers were saying Snead was going to play in the slot this year. And we were like, what? So then that doesn't make any sense. I think what they meant by the Colston role was he's just going to be their possession receiver. It doesn't matter that he's lining up outside or in the slot. And that's really been true. He's led the team in targets in 3 of the last 4 games. Still, it's a tough matchup. I think I'm more excited about Snead than I am about anyone else, even though he was dealing with that toe injury, and we can't be super confident that he's like 100%. Seattle's giving up the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers out of the slot, but they're well above average everywhere else against wide receivers and tight ends this year. You can kind of beat them with the tight end last year, but that's not really the case this year. So I'm not really sure. I am excited about Jimmy Graham, and I know you are too. He's seen 9, 8, 9, and 9 targets in his last 4 games. For perspective, Gronk has seen 2, 6, 8, and 4 targets over his last 4. I know you want to trash, and it's the revenge game, of course. I don't know what Fantasy Labs does for that. Did he just give you like a +3 to your expected points when it's a narrative or a revenge game? What about Baldwin? I know you want to trash Baldwin, so why don't you go ahead and do that?
So Baldwin just hasn't done anything this year. It's been, I mean, Graham is the wide receiver 1 there. Baldwin has, he has
4, 4, and 8 targets over his last 3 weeks.
Right. So he has 2 games with 10 or more targets. The rest of the time he has not seen all that much work. There's this whole the Saints are worse against slot wide receivers than they are against outside wide receivers. The Saints are just bad against wide receivers. So I don't see why people want to play Baldwin. I mean, I guess Baldwin is like your GPP pivot off of Jimmy Graham, but he's 6,900 now, which is like I think the most expensive he's been all season, and he has like 2 games with more than 13 DraftKings points, and we've had 7 weeks now. So now that Graham is like playing the wide receiver 1 role, I'm just not all that interested in him. Russell Wilson is like injured. He says he was like supposed to be out 4 weeks, and he is not playing well. So I'm not all that excited about Baldwin like everybody else is. I've seen people saying they want to use Baldwin in cash. I think that's crazy. I mean, sure, he could have. Yeah,
you're not playing him in cash. I still think he is kind of interesting, but I've always been big fan of his and like kind of don't want to give up the dream just yet. He's expected to face off against Devontae Harris in the slot. Harris has career 99 snaps ever playing football, and he's graded out negatively in every single game he's played so far. So yeah, and I agree with your point on Russell Wilson. He does not look right, and I've heard some people speculate that that's hurting Baldwin. Like a lot of his production came on plays where Russell Wilson was running around, evading a sack, and then chucks it to Baldwin over the middle of the field, and he turns it into a big gain. So that could be negatively impacting him. Jimmy Graham, I think, is the real deal. Amazing what he's done coming back from that patellar injury. He's our number 3 graded tight ends via the pass. Only tight ends above him are Greg Olsen and Rob Gronkowski. Do you think Breeze is going to be contrarian this week?
Yeah. So I like Breeze this week, especially with the injuries for Seattle. You know, the pass rush injury is big with Michael Bennett out and Cam Chancellor. So Breeze has so many weapons that, you know, he'll be able to avoid Sherman. I think he's going to have success. So I really want to use him in GPPs. Like I want to load up on Breeze in GPPs. He's just like a lock to throw for 300 yards when he's at home, and he's so much more efficient. So definitely interested in him. I don't think you can use him in cash games just because, you know, you would use Matt Ryan before you would use Drew Brees. But he's definitely someone I want GPP exposure to. I don't know who you want to pair him up with. I guess it's Snead or maybe Fleener, but I don't think you necessarily have to pair him with anyone. And then the guy I really like in this game is Kristen Michael. He's sort of been like in a slump because he's played against some really good rushing defenses. But even in his slump, in three of his last 4 games, he has over 20 DraftKings points. And he continues to get targets. He has at least 3 targets in his last 4 games. So we know that the Saints are terrible against the run. So really like him, especially with Russell Wilson banged up. Anybody else you like?
Yeah. No, that's a good call.
All right. So next game, the Pats at the Bills. So the Bills looked like atrocious last week with McCoy banged up. McCoy looks to be doubtful this week. Brady has like struggled against the Bills in the past, but the Bills have looked bad. They've just looked bad the last couple of weeks on defense. After having like a big streak there where they look like one of the best defenses in the league over the last 2 weeks, they've sort of struggled a little bit. Especially last week, they looked awful. So are you interested in the Pats players this week or anyone on the Bills?
What's the line done?
So
where's it at and how's it moved?
That one has moved towards the Pats, and the over-under stayed about the same. But the Bills are projected to score like 20 points. It's one of the lowest on the slate. And
it started off with a close line, right? Like 3.5 or something?
No, it started with the Pats by 5, but it's moved to the Pats by 6. I mean, the Pats are away, and it's a divisional game, so those games are usually closer Vegas lines. But
all right, so I love Brady this week, potentially in cash, definitely in GPPs where he came in at only 7% owned on aces. He's number 1 in fantasy points per game. He looks fantastic. Easily the best quarterback on the field, except for when Breeze is at home. So I really like him. I don't want to give up on Edelman just yet. He's leading the team in targets with 28, just has 0 touchdowns. He had a bunch last season, but not very many throughout his career prior to that. James White maybe is eating into that role. We talked about that last week. James White has 22 targets, second most on the team since Brady's return, and 3 touchdowns. I could see that tipping more towards Edelman's favor. Still, it's kind of hard to play him. Just know that he's going to be low owned, and he's Brady's favorite target. Blunt, I'm kind of interested in. If this game moves to 7, I think that's going to be like a big deal for me. Just we know how much better Blunt is when the Patriots win by like about 7 or more. He had 24 carries for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Gronk's always kind of in play, though I like other options for cash, given just kind of the number of targets he's seeing. On Buffalo, I'm not interested in anyone except for Gillislee. I think he's going to go low owned after what happened last week. Really, the entire running game stunk, but he's still low priced. I still project him as seeing a significant workload in terms of carries and targets.
Does it bother you that Reggie Bush was in for the goal line carry last week?
Yeah, probably would. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like Gillislee is a guy that I'll probably have like almost zero exposure to in tournaments, and I'm deciding what to do with him in cash games. I think a big reason that the Bills were so good the last few weeks was that McCoy was playing out of his mind. Against the Rams, he averaged 8 yards per carry. Against the 49ers, he averaged 7 yards per carry. Against the Cardinals, he averaged 6.5. I mean, he was just running out of his mind, and it made it so easy for the Bills to control the game, those games. But I mean, the run game looked non-existent without McCoy. I don't know what you're doing over there, Scott, but and then Marquise Goodwin is out, so he is. They've lost their field stretcher. Robert Woods is banged up. I don't know.
Justin Hunter week.
Oh God. I mean, that's who's going to be their deep threat, and that's where they throw the ball. But Hunter only saw 4 targets last week, and that was with Robert Woods out. So I'm kind of in on the Pats defense this week. If McCoy is out, I think the Bills are really going to struggle to move the ball, though the Pats have been kind of bad this year on defense. So I don't know. This is
okay. So the narrative is Belichick takes out the opposing team's best player. McCoy is out. Sammy Watkins is out. Marquise Goodwin, their deep threat, is out. Woods is banged up. Justin Hunter wasn't on a team 2 or 3 weeks ago. Who would that be? Like I don't this if the Pats are only favored by 6, I don't care that it's on the road. What is Vegas telling us here? Do you think Buffalo's defense is gonna surprise us? I like Brady a lot. I don't know.
No, I mean I think the Pats are the most favored team this week. It's just a slate that the games are just closer. It's just because it's a divisional game, and I think if the Pats were at home, they would be favored by like 10. The Bills are not going to look good in this game. I just can't see any possible way they do. That's why I struggle with Gillislee. The idea that he's going to get 15, 16 touches is probably true. I just don't see them being quality touches by any means. But he is cheap. He is in play. If I like lineups the way with him in them, I might consider him. But I'm trying to find ways around using him. I think this week. You got any other thoughts on this one?
Nope.
All right. So Jets at Browns. So this one is projected to be fairly low scoring. We know that our favorite quarterback, Josh McCown, is back. If you want to watch a video of him dunking a basketball, find my 2QBs article about him. Barnage is definitely in play with McCown back. Pryor has practiced, but I'm not 100% sure on his status this week. I believe he's been limited in practice. And then we know Fitzpatrick is back. And both these defenses are terrible and both of these offenses are terrible. So what are we doing on this one?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I love Pryor if I think he's healthy, especially against this Jets secondary that you could burn deep. Revis is still playing, but he looks like he's cooked. And he had Buster Screen out wide, and he got torched last week. But I don't think he's healthy. I'm not confident that he is. Matt Harmon had some great stats, some of those next-gen stats he keeps tweeting out. Yards per separation, something like that. But it was really cool. Pretty much showed that prior to last week, Pryor was just burning cornerbacks. And then last week, the cornerback was kind of hanging with him every step of the way. Agree with that. The McCown Barnage thought there. We know how Barnage's stats look when McCown plays versus when he does not. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is kind of in play in tournaments too. The Browns are giving up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We were heavy on Marshall last week. Then we saw Jimmy Smith was playing. We backed down a little bit, but we both still loved Marshall. Didn't really do much. It was actually pretty disappointing. I still love Marshall. He's pretty much matchup proof, and he has another great matchup this week if Joe Hayden is out. Joe Hayden's currently questionable. Not sure if he plays or not, but if he's out, really going to want a lot of Marshall. Kind of like him a lot anyway. The guy I'm excited about, who Johnny really isn't too much, is Matt Forte. That's probably one of my favorite tournament plays of the week. He was only 4% owned on Fantasy Aces, which doesn't really make sense, following up a 30-carry, 100-yard, 4-target, 54-yard, 2-touchdown game last week. It went back to having kind of like a bell cow role in the offense. Jets running backs saw just 5. All other Jets running backs saw just 5 carries and 0 targets last week. And then over the prior 4 weeks before that, he only managed 64% of the team's running back touches. In the first 2 weeks of the season, is at 88%. It looks like he's back to that role. I know Johnny doesn't think that's something we can predict. I think that might have something to do with the fact that he was healthy the first 2 weeks, and then heading into week 3, he was on the injury report, and he's been on the injury report every week since. But Bilal Powell was on the injury report last week and the injury report this week. It looks like he's banged up, and kind of how you beat the Browns via the run is on the ground and not via the pass. So Cleveland's giving points per game to opposing running backs, and 67% of that has gone to running backs on the ground, which is the 4th most. So if Powell is banged up, it really makes sense that the Jets kind of like bang him on the ground with Forte. And we know last week the Browns gave up a combined 30 carries, 271 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns to Jeremy Hill, Gio Bernard, and Rex Burkhead. I mean, at 4%, his chances of getting another week like last week, it's just like worth kind of loading up on some shares.
Yeah, I think he's in play for tournaments. Bilal Powell is off the injury report, by the way. But
as of when?
As of yesterday. And I'm just like not interested in playing old running backs coming off of 30 carry games. He averaged 3.3 yards per carry. Forte has only averaged 4 yards per carry or more twice this season. He doesn't have a single game averaging more than 4.5 yards per carry. He has not been very effective. You look at his pretty much only 3 usable games have come when he's had over 20 carries. And I just don't like using old injury-prone players after coming off of huge workloads. So 0 chance you can use him in cash games. But yeah, I think you can use him in tournaments just because the Browns have been so bad. And then I also found the report that Pryor is off of the injury report, practiced fully on Friday, which means that probably pushes Josh McCown into like probably my favorite cash game quarterback. He's not priced as if he's going to be starting quarterback. He's 5,200 this week. The Jets are super, super bad against the pass. And they're allowing big plays. They're allowing plays to tight ends, and those are sort of, Barnage and Pryor are going to be the two guys for McCown. And McCown against the Ravens was shredding them. He was completing 71% of his passes, had 2 touchdowns, and then he destroyed his shoulder. And while he tried to play through it, he was pretty bad in the second half. But big on McCown this week. Love Pryor now that I know he's healthy. Really like Barnage. He's been super consistent over the last few weeks. He's getting around 7 targets a game, and he's had over 50 yards in, I believe, 5 or 6 straight games. And he doesn't have a touchdown this season, and he scored 9 last year. So I think that hopefully changes this week. I think he has a good shot to get in the end zone against the Jets, especially because you can't run on them. So the Browns are going to have to move the ball through the air, and the Browns passing game has been pretty good this season, even though they lose every week. So any other thoughts there, man?
No, that's too many words on the Browns.
Oh, also, can we play both of these defenses? I think you can play either of them.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Defenses, whatever.
Yeah. All right. So, defense is just so hard this week. I feel like you just have to just punt. So next game, Raiders Bucks. This one has a pretty high total. It's a pick 'em. I believe they have the highest or the second highest over under on the slate. Looking at, people want to play Jameis and Carr and Cash. I think both are viable. Evans is definitely in play. Jacquizz Rodgers is back in play. I really like Amari Cooper this week. People aren't talking about him. I don't know why. Matchup's awesome. Cooper had one bad game against Jacksonville when he was shadowed by, Ramsey, who has been tough on wide receivers this season. Who are you looking at in this one, man?
I'm not sure. What's really shocking to me? The Raiders are 5-2.
Yeah, man.
I keep forgetting that they're winning, in spite of this defense. Jameis was the highest owned quarterback on Fantasy Aces last week in their tournaments. So he's not a contrarian play. Like a lot of people were saying that he would be. He's definitely not. And then over the last 2 weeks, Oakland is giving up just 235 passing yards on average, 1 interception, 0.5 touchdowns. Basically, Bortles and Alex Smith stunk against them the last 2 weeks. But that's not really true, too. Bortles is just bad and has been bad. Alex Smith was hyper efficient. He just didn't really score any touchdowns or have the need to pass very much against them. So they're still bad. It is still a pretty good matchup. Mike Evans is first in targets, 5th in fantasy points for the season. No Vincent Jackson, but he's also the 3rd most expensive wide receiver this week. Jacquizz is averaging 31 touches per game in each of his starts. Though last week, Peyton Barber had 12 carries and Antoine Smith had 3 of the team's 4 running back targets. So I'm not too confident that we're going to see another game like maybe his first start. I think they're going to start making this a little bit more of a committee, though he will easily get the bulk of the work. And he has been good on those touches. Latavius Murray is kind of interesting too. Last week he saw 18 carries, 4 targets, and 2 touchdowns. He's kind of like Melvin Gordon, where it doesn't feel good to play him, but somehow he's still scoring touchdowns at probably an unsustainable rate. But it's still there behind one of the best offensive lines in football. Not really too excited about any of these guys. Maybe Evans and Cash. There's a lot of running back value this week, so I don't think you have to play Jacquizz, whose price has risen significantly on DraftKings. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think Peyton Barber earned a role last week. He looked good, and he was a guy that Matt Waldman really liked in his scouting stuff this offseason. And Oakland is I think a better team than everyone thinks. Jameis, I'm not sold on Jameis as like the top quarterback play this week. I think a lot of it comes from him throwing for 3 touchdowns this past week, but it was like the 49ers, and he only threw for 269 yards. And then he threw for 219 yards and only 1 touchdown against the Panthers. And the Panthers have just as bad, if not a worse, pass defense than the Raiders. And you know, I'm not super sold on Jameis as being like a lock to have a great game. I think he should have a good game because the Raiders are bad, but I'm not 100% sold on him like a lot of people are. Evans,
I agree.
Evans is definitely. Evans is just a volume play. The matchup is not as good as it was last week, but when you're getting 13 targets a week and you're catching 5 or more passes every single game, and you're scoring he's scored a touchdown in every game outside of Denver. When you're scoring a touchdown every week, and should be a good bet to go over 100 yards in this game. So I think he's the top wide receiver play on the board. He's also playing a lot better than he played last year. So, but I like Carr and Cooper on the other side. Everyone wants to play Jameis. So I'm going to have a lot of Carr and his wide receivers in tournaments, especially because he's pretty much the same price as Jameis. But I think this game's stackable, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little lower scoring than everyone thinks. Is that about? Do you have any interest in Brait? I'm like done with him.
No, I do kind of like Brait.
He's like interesting, but he has 3 targets in each of his last 2 games. So
yeah, that doesn't make sense to me though. I feel like that's gotta rise. But yeah, it's hard to make that. It's hard to feel good about it. But I think he's in play in tournaments. Maybe as a pivot off of Doyle.
Right. All right. Any other thoughts on this one?
Nope.
All right. Next game, Chiefs at the Colts. I think now that Charles is dead again, Spencer Ware is probably the top running back play on the board. The Colts are going to be missing 2 defensive linemen, from what I understand, or they are expected to be missing. They've allowed, I think, 120 rushing yards in 2 or 3 games straight. They stink. And Ware is like the Chiefs are just running the ball so well that Ware is pretty much the entire offense, and will be as long as Charles is out. I like Luck. I like Hilton. I especially like Hilton now that people are on Moncrief, with Moncrief coming back. Even when Moncrief was playing, Hilton was still seeing over 10 targets. He only has 1 game with less than 10 targets. He had 9. I think Doyle might be a trap. The Chiefs have been really, really good against the tight end, and Moncrief is back, which means Doyle is going to lose red zone work to Moncrief. And I also like Kansas City defense. They might be my favorite play on defense just because defense is so hard this week. Thoughts?
Yeah, I disagree with your call on Kansas City's defense. They're a team that plays much, much tougher at home, and they're away this week. Also, they're not generating any pressure. What's their best defender's name? Who's out? He's not back, right?
You mean Houston?
Yeah, is that Houston?
Justin Houston? Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's still hurt. I don't think he's gonna play. Yeah. And they're not really generating any pressures this week, so I do like Andrew Luck, who's actually PFF's highest rated quarterback this season. Last season, he graded out in the bottom 3. I think just above like Colin Kaepernick and Nick Foles. So he's playing a lot better. And getting Moncrief back is definitely going to help him out. I agree that Ware is probably a must play with Jamal Charles out again. Indianapolis is giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Ware has been the most efficient running back since week 8 of last season. I think that's a good call.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm in on the Chiefs, man, is because defense is close to impossible this week. On the main slate, you just can't find a good one. The Colts are allowing lots of sacks. Luck is turning the ball over. The Chiefs defense has been a fantasy performer this season. They are generating, while they aren't getting sacks, they're generating turnovers. It's just a really hard week for defense, man. It's just really hard.
All right. So I want to talk about T.Y. Hilton a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the volume he's getting, but the matchup's also great as well. So Kansas City's cornerbacks on the outside are Marcus Peters and Phillip Gaines. Peters is great. He's our number 6 graded cornerback this season, but he's also slow and prone to the big play. Last season, he gave up over 900 yards in coverage. It was the 3rd most among all corners. He gave up 5 plays of 40 or more yards, tied for the third most. This season, he's giving up 2 such plays, tied for the 4th most. And part of this probably has to do with the fact that he's slow. He had 4.53 40-yard dash time in 2015. Hilton ran a 4.34 40 in 2012. Now, Gaines, who's on the opposite side of him, he's much faster, but he's also nowhere near as good. He grades out 97th of 116 qualifying corners. So that's going to be about like 45% of Hilton's routes in this game. And the rest of the time, he's going to be in the slot up against Steven Nelson, who ran a 4.49 40 in 2015. He's our 12th worst graded cornerback this season. Over the last 3 weeks, New Orleans, Oakland, Pittsburgh, he's been targeted 18 times. He's given up 15 catches for 186 yards and a touchdown. Hilton's just been a monster, and I'm not worried at all about Moncrief coming back. And I've heard people talk about Moncrief being a top play. I don't know. I'm not too excited. What do you think, Johnny?
I think Moncrief's a good play. I don't know about a great play. I struggle to play with guys coming off of like multi-week absences. And he wasn't even like, we weren't even sure that he was going to play early on this week. And it was like, they were like figuring out if he was going to be able to play. So that bothers me. But he is super cheap. I mean, he's 5,400 on DraftKings. But I think, he's going to be on the outside more, so he probably runs against Peters more than Hilton does. And I like Moncrief, don't love him. I think I like Luck the most there. When thinking about who Moncrief helps, I think it's Luck. So I like Luck a lot. Ware is pretty much the only guy I'm considering on the Chiefs. You playing anyone else on the Chiefs? Okay. All right. Yeah, and I think Krief hurts Doyle a lot, so I'm not really on Doyle this week. All right. So next game.
Yeah.
Lions at the Texans. So this one, the Texans are actually favored in this one, which kind of surprised me. But I guess the Lions defense is probably one of the worst in football, and they're going to be without Darius Slay. So
wait, the Lions are favored?
The Texans are favored, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that surprised me. But the Lions defense is going to be missing Darius Slay. They've been just about the worst passing defense in football. The Texans have one of the best passing defenses, but nobody really talks about it because their offense is so bad. And then we might have Alfred Blue if Lamar Miller misses. Can you use Brock or his pass catchers in this game? What are you doing with him? Yeah,
man, it feels so gross, but he's definitely in play in like tournaments and stuff. He's like 5th in the NFL in attempts. Gets set to face off against our PFF's 8th worst graded secondary. They're going to be without Darius Slay, who ranks 10th best among all cornerbacks in coverage this season. The Lions are giving up the most fantasy points per game to opposing passers. Kirk Cousins just dropped 23.5 on them. Case Keenum dropped 30 the week before that. I mean, if Case Keenum can do it. Also, Osweiler, interestingly enough, is averaging 16.3 fantasy points per game at home and 8.5 fantasy points per game away. So he's a home favorite this week, which correlates well for fantasy. I mean, it's gross, but he's probably in play.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Fuller is a guy who I'm really interested in tournaments. People seem to have forgotten about him. He's recovered from his injury and should be able to get open deep against the Lions. And then a guy that I'm really interested in is, if I can even pronounce his name, is CJ Fedorowicz. I guess it's pronounced. Lions have been really, really, really bad against the tight end, and he has now seen 7, 7, and 8 targets over the last 3. Brock seems to like him. His snaps are going up. His role has been increasing, and I think he makes a lot of sense. And he's 2,800 on DraftKings. He's definitely in play for cash games.
CJ Fedora tips. If we play him in cash, like the JMO thing, if we play him in cash, we have to do a Fedora tip for every catch he has.
No.
He's a good play. Yeah, he's second in targets, 6th in PPR over the last 3 weeks. Detroit is really trash against the tight end. I like your point on Fuller too. Actually, I'm pulling it up right now. Yeah, Detroit is giving up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. I like the point on Fuller. So in every game that they both played, Nuck has 6 more targets, but only 3 more catches, just 1 more touchdown, and 30 fewer yards than Fuller. And their price differential on one of the sites is like insanely glaring and confusing. Don't remember which one that is though. But yeah, I'm kind of leaning more Fuller, especially in tournaments where you can get that big play upside.
Yeah, and I think
what about everyone on Detroit? You get a lot of bodies back.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's like no one. I think Vegas is telling us something, and I think Houston's passing defense has been really, really good. They've been worse against the run than they have been against the pass, and good luck figuring out who's the running back to own in Detroit. And they've been bad against the run. They have not been bad against pass catching running backs. They have been really good against pass catching running backs. So I think they're allowing like 4 catches for 25 yards to running back, something like that, something really low. So not really interested in anyone on the Lions. I probably won't have any of them. People are going to want to play Tate, but now that Theo Riddick is back and Eric Ebron, I think his role will go down a little bit. So I'm not all excited about anyone. And then if Lamar Miller is out, Alfred Blue is like a really good play this week. You agree?
Not really. I guess. Ugh, I just hate him.
Yeah. I mean, he's 3,000 on DraftKings. He will assume an every down role against what is, a bottom 10 rushing defense in a game that they're expected to win, and they are at home. So I'm in on Blue. I probably like Blue more than Gillislee if Miller is out.
I don't think he's out though. I think recent reports were that he's going to play. They're not sure what his workload might be.
Yeah, he's a game time decision, so he probably plays. But I think pay attention.
If he doesn't play, do you think that makes Brock Osweiler more attractive?
No. I think Brock is a long shot either way. So
I'm looking at Alfred Blue's stats last year. I think he only went over 12 fantasy points once.
That's fine. He only needs 9.
Okay, cool. All right.
So, next game is the Cardinals-Panthers game. I am not on David Johnson this week. I am on him in tournaments, not in cash. I think Palmer, this is it for Palmer. If he doesn't do it this week, it's over. The receivers are kind of banged up. I think John Brown and Fitz are both in play with Floyd, possibly not playing. And then, are you interested in anyone on the Panthers offense? I liked Olsen a lot for a while, but it looks like he wasn't targeted as much last week. I'm not sure what was up with that, but like Olsen every week. You interested in anyone on this one?
Dude, what? You're not on David Johnson?
No. So I think it was correct to fade him against the Jets, and I think this is another spot that's not good for him.
No, it's David Johnson. He's always in play.
He's in play for tournaments. I'm just not using him.
He's in play. He's in play in cash too. Weeks he has 93 fantasy points. He has 83 carries, 22 targets. That's the most fantasy points by any running back by 21 points. That's the most touches of any running back by 16 touches. That's essentially an extra game over the last 3 weeks among all running backs. He's clearly, at least these past 3 weeks, like putting together games and like a workload that's super unsustainable, sure, but like massive, like LaDainian Tomlinson-esque numbers. I think despite the tough matchup, I think he's still in play. Greg Olsen's a guy I think I am on. So Kelvin Benjamin's going to draw Patrick Peterson and should really shut him down. So Arizona's second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but last year in the playoffs, Olsen saw 8 targets against them and caught 6 for 113. What's really interesting about Olsen is so he's priced as like a shitty old end, but he's putting up like elite wide receiver fantasy numbers. He ranks first in targets and first in fantasy points per game among all tight ends. Among all wide receivers and tight ends combined, he ranks 4th in targets per game and 6th in fantasy points per game. On DraftKings, among all wide receivers and tight ends, his salary is only the 18th highest. He's not being used as a tight end. 57% of his routes have come from the slot, 5th most among tight ends. He has 13 deep targets. Those are targets on balls traveling 20 or more yards through the air. That ranks first at the tight end position by 6. And among all receivers, that ranks 7th most. When Cam Newton's targeting Olsen, he has a 113.4 QB rating. When he targets anyone else on the team, that doesn't reach triple digits. I think, and Patrick Peterson's allowing the second fewest fantasy points per snap among all starting corners. I think Kelvin Benjamin does nothing. If you have him in season long, you're praying for a touchdown. But it just really makes the most sense to attack Arizona with Olsen. And I still do love David Johnson just based on recent workload.
Yeah, I mean, I like David Johnson for tournaments. I'm just not. I don't think this is a week to pay up for the top running back in cash games. And I still think he luck boxed against the Jets. He got 2 goal line touchdowns. The Jets pretty much weren't allowing goal line touchdowns to anyone, and then he got them. The Panthers' run defense is like really, really good, and their passing defense is really, really bad. But, this DJ's in play every week. I'm just not as excited about him this week as I have been, in other weeks. So, and then Greg Olsen, I think Greg Olsen and Graham are like your top tight end plays if you want to pay up at tight end. I would prefer both of them to Gronkowski this week. And I want to use the Panthers defense in tournaments. I also am interested in Palmer in tournaments. If the Palmer collapse is actually happening, then the Panthers should be able to get at him. All right. So the next game is the Chargers at the Broncos game. Early in the week, I was kind of interested in Rivers and tournaments and stuff, but looks like Vegas pretty much projects the Broncos to just smash them at home. And do you want anyone in this game other than, Devontae Booker is the free square this week, but are you interested in anybody else?
No, I think that's it. I think that's right. I think Booker's a lock. It was one of Aaron H's guys. We talked about him in the preseason a lot, and in MFL 10s too, I think. San Diego is giving up the second most fantasy points per game to running backs. Booker really, he looks fantastic. He looks like a great fit for this offense. At home, favored by 4. I think that's the play. Not too worried about Cabri Bibbs. In a tournament, you can go Simeon and the receivers as a leverage play off of Booker, and that's it. That's all she wrote.
Yeah, and then I think Henry and Gates. Henry and Gates are interesting for tournaments, but with Henry with the concussion thing, I don't think you can play him in cash, especially since his role has been a little limited with Gates coming back.
Yeah, actually, I do like Gates. I don't like Henry. His targets and snaps were declining in every week this season since Gates' return. It was really more of an afterthought in the last few games. Gates had, I think, led the team in targets. Denver's giving up 28% of their receiving fantasy points to tight ends. That's the second most. But it's a gross tournament play, and that's all Gates would be.
And the thing about Gates is the volume has been there. He's getting tons of targets, but he's been playing really bad. He looks really bad.
That's because at this stage of his career, he probably is. Yeah.
And he can no longer take steroids without getting caught. So, and then I think if you're able to fit the Denver defense in a week that defense is really, really tough, that they just have a solid floor. They're not going to get you 0 points. They're going to get you 4, 5, 6 points. And then, if any defense has a chance to take something for a touchdown, it's the Broncos. Anything else you like here? I'm not super excited about this game other than Booker.
Nope.
Okay. All right. So Packers Falcons. This is the projected fireworks game. So the over-under is 52.5, which is the highest of the week and one of the higher over-unders in a while. Falcons have a 27.5 point implied team total. Matt Ryan, coming off of a down performance, has dropped in price since last week. And I think he is yet again the highest raw point total projection for a quarterback for me would be Matt Ryan. If I can fit him in cash, I like him as a cash game play. Julio makes a lot of sense. The Packers are, giving it up to wide receiver ones this season, though they've improved a little bit recently with the way they're using their safeties to defend against getting beat deep. And then they also just lost Demarius Randall, so they're down to, starting another replacement level corner. And Freeman is going to be the only running back this week. The Packers have been really good against the run, but they've mostly played against bottom 10 rushing units. The Falcons are running the ball really, really well, using multiple tight end sets. And that offense has just been awesome. I think Sanu is interesting for tournaments because everyone's going to be on Julio. And then I think Rodgers is in play. Jordy probably sees Trufant. And Cobb's a little banged up, so I think Ty Montgomery's kind of like a cash game lock this week, especially because the Falcons are getting shredded by running backs and tight ends in the passing game, and that's sort of the role that Montgomery is playing. Thoughts?
Yeah, so Cobb is a little banged up. He's questionable and was limited in practice, but so is Ty Montgomery. He was questionable and limited in practice. These are both equally great spots for both Cobb and Montgomery. So over the past 3 weeks, Randall Cobb has 36 targets. That's the most in the league. The Falcons are giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers out of the slot. But like you said, they're also very vulnerable to running backs who are also capable pass catchers. So right now, actually, So they're giving up 17.7 receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is easily the most. And 55% of their fantasy points allowed to running backs has been through the air, which is the third most. So definitely a good call. I like both those guys a lot. I think those are equally great spots for both of them. Julio's in a great spot too. PFF's projecting Ladarius Gunter to shadow, which means like Mohamed Sanu is going to get like backups. Ty Montgomery, 12 carries over the last 2 weeks, and 10 targets and 10 receptions in both of those 2 games. Matt Ryan, fantasy QB1 up to this point in the season. He looks amazing. And then Devonta Freeman. So if you asked us on like Tuesday, you were calling him Devonta Free Space or Free Square. So he's 9th among running backs in fantasy points at this point in the season, and that's in a committee. The Falcons are scoring the most fantasy points as a team at the running back position. Last season, he was fantasy's RB1 when he wasn't in a committee. Yeah, it's a brutal matchup against Green Bay, but it's pretty much 2015 Devonta Freeman workload at a really low price. I think he's still kind of in play, despite easily going up against the toughest defense for running backs.
Yeah. Early in the week, I was on Freeman, and I wasn't on Ware because I thought Charles was going to be back for, to take 6 to 8 touches away. And then when Charles died again, I moved Ware into where I had Freeman. Since he's
that's the better move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Freeman's in a great spot. It's just tough to fit expensive running backs this week, since there's not a whole lot of value at wide receiver. But then, are you interested in Devontae Adams after his big game last week? I think with Trufant on Jordy and Cobb banged up, I guess he makes some sense. Not excited about him though, are you?
Yeah, I mean, Trufant, Jordy Nelson's definitely not in play. I just don't think Cobb's really that banged up. I think him and Ty Montgomery are probably going to be the focal point of this passing attack. So they're kind of limiting snaps. Can you do some research into that for me and let me know your thoughts there? But if it is seriously a concern, I could see, Adams getting a higher workload. The reason why Adams was such a good play last week was the Bears have been weirdly very vulnerable to wide receivers lining up to their quarterback's left. Right now, they're second most fantasy points per game to opposing left wide receivers, and Devontae Adams lines up in the left more than any other wide receiver except for the Patriots' Malcolm Mitchell. So Tracy Porter was on Jordy Nelson. I thought that was a good matchup because Porter kind of stinks, but Jordy looks cooked as well. So in hindsight, it just made a ton of sense. And I'm not sure if that was just a 1 week thing or something more we can expect. We all hate Adams and he stinks, but yeah, I don't know. I think Cobb and Tymo is the way to go.
Yeah. It looks like Cobb was limited all week with a hamstring issue. So probably don't want to use Cobb in any type of cash games or single entry type GPPs. But I think everyone but Jordy is in play for tournaments, I think, for the Packers, especially if you're using Rodgers. I'm not interested in Jordy at all. He's been ineffective all season, and he should see Trufant and shadow coverage. Jordy has like one game where he's met value at 7K. So, are you interested in him at all?
Who's this?
Jordy Nelson.
Dude, no.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Just said that.
Oh, all right. Well, I was looking up Cobb, man. Okay, so this is a game that you want to get exposure to. I think it's super stackable for tournaments. And that's really all there is to say about it. All right. So next game, Eagles Cowboys. This is kind of a weird one. I really like Zeke. Dez is back, but I'm not sure, what that's going to probably back. Not sure what that's going to mean for him. I think that just helps Zeke even more. I don't really like any of the Eagles. I think maybe the Cowboys defense might be in play. What are you doing with this one?
So Philly's actually been pretty good against running backs. But Dallas is at home, and it's Zeke who's the GOAT, so probably not too worried there. I think the only person in play on Philly's side is Jordan Matthews, and that's another one that feels gross, but he has the matchup. If Orlando Scandrick's out, Johnny, can you double check for me? But last I checked, he was questionable. He hasn't played since week 2 due to a hamstring injury. In the interim, Anthony Brown has played the slot. For the season, no defense has allowed more fantasy points per game to receivers out of the slot than Dallas. A lot of that has been due to how bad Anthony Brown has been. He's been targeted 29 times, more than any other Dallas quarterback. He's allowed 25 catches for 249 yards and a touchdown. He ranks second worst in completion percentage, 7th worst in fantasy points allowed per snap, 11th worst in a QB rating. And the majority of his production has gone to guys like Brandon LaFell, Sterling Shepard, Jeremy Curley. Really not anyone who's gone crazy. Jordan Matthews, he's their main slot receiver. 66% of his routes and 66% of his targets have been from the slot. He also has a 4-inch and 17-pound advantage over Brown. Again, this is completely dependent on if Scandrick sits out again.
It looks like Scandrick will play limited snaps this weekend.
All right. Well,
Matthews should still get time against
Brown.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Zeke's in play.
Right, so maybe a few shares in a GPP.
I think Zeke is in play. Like I've said earlier, it's tough to pay up at running back this week. But in tournaments, using Zeke and David Johnson instead of getting the value, definitely in play. Kristen Michael in play as well. I think they're all 3 really good plays. Not really interested in the passing game for the Cowboys. Eagles have been really, really good. So I think this is probably a low-scoring game. So does Vegas. They have it as one of the lower totals on the week at 42.5. Though the Cowboys are expected to win, I think the Cowboys defense is interesting. We've seen Wentz kind of not playing as well the last, few games compared to how he played to start the season. He did turn it over twice. Actually, I think 3 times against Minnesota. He fumbled the ball a lot. So it's about all I got on that one. Anyone else? Anything else?
Nah.
Yeah. All right. And I know people have talked about Zach Ertz too. I'm not using a guy who's seeing 3 targets a week. So,
nope.
Last game, Vikings at the Bears. How excited are you to use Matt Asiata this week and get his guaranteed 3 touchdowns?
Yeah, dude, I have such a boner. If you're a longtime listener to this show, I have a plotter fetish. And that Asiata is like the plotter. He's just going to get 18 carries for 31 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it's going to be so good.
Yeah, and the best part is that he's finally going to show the Vikings that he's better than Jerick McKinnon too.
So all the metrics dudes are like raging, and all the plotter fetish dudes are like, yeah, duh.
Yeah, so McKinnon has kind of not been good this year. Asiata has been pretty decent over the last 2 weeks. He's picked up a lot more carries with McKinnon struggling. He has 12 and 14 attempts over the last 2 weeks. He's getting goal line work. He had 8 targets last week. So he's more involved in the passing game around the goal line, and he's starting to get all the early down work. So there's, McKinnon didn't practice again today. He is not expected to play. Even if he does play, I don't think he's going to have a very big role, especially if they're winning. And it's hard to see, I know people are in on the Bears. The game has come down from a 5-point favorite for the Vikings to a 4-point favorite, even though all of the 85% of the tickets are coming in on the Vikings. I just don't see how the Bears are going to show up for this one, but maybe. So I like Asiata a lot. I like the Vikings defense. Not really interested in anyone on the Bears. You interested in anybody else?
Nope. I think that was a good call. I'm still probably not going to load up on Asiata too much if McKinnon does play. But if he doesn't, I think that's a really good GPP option.
Yeah, and I think, like on FanDuel playing the Sunday Monday slate with like people uncertain, I think it's nice to get in some Asiata shares in tournaments where he'll probably be a little lower owned on FanDuel versus DraftKings where there's, late swap. So, you interested in Diggs, Rudolph, Thielen, any of those guys? I'm not really on the Vikings passing game.
No, dude.
All right, man. Well, that's it for this week. You got any other final thoughts?
No. Are you making me do another podcast today? What is this?
Yeah, so we're going to get on tonight. We're going to try and get on guests that we've been trying to get on this season. I think we finally have a chance to bring him on.
Evan Silva?
He's coming on soon, though. Week 9, next week?
So yeah, Evan Silva's coming on next week, next Tuesday night. We're going to do this one early. I'm going to be completely exposed as a stat guy who is really bad at like real tangible football knowledge. But that's okay. I'll also try and say Mr. Silva every time so I don't accidentally call him Elvin like I did twice last time. But he's the GOAT, man. He's really – I don't ever learn as much as I do when I listen to a podcast with Evan on it. So really excited to get him on. He's the king of fantasy football.
Yeah. And then, so that's going to be awesome. And then tonight we're just going to sort of shoot the shit about the slate, maybe cover some positions, something like that. It'll be a chance for everybody to play the drinking game as well. And then hopefully if we can get on the guests that we're trying to get on, he's a little more contrarian than us, so have a little more GPP talks because I know we mostly focus on cash games. And then for EOM asking about kickers, the kickers who I would be interested in this one, I like Will Lutz because I think New Orleans is going to score on Seattle. I like Josh Lambo, and I like Cairo Santos. You have any? Oh, and Mason Crosby. You have any kicker thoughts, Scott?
Patriots kicker, Dallas kicker, Minnesota kicker.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think Crosby's probably my top kicker if I had to pick one this week. So, all right. That is it for this week. And we will see anyone who wants to hang out again tonight. And all right. Thanks for listening. Peace.